Well, today I'm very honored to introduce Hannah Warren. Hannah is the Communications and Advocacy Manager and writer for the Baszucki Group and Metabolic Mind. And Hannah works to increase awareness of the emerging field of metabolic psychiatry. She has worked in the nonprofit field the majority of her career, most recently as Marketing and Development Director at Serenity Hospice and Home, a nonprofit serving terminally ill patients and their loved ones. In 2008, she founded Jhoole, an eco-fashion social enterprise that employs women in India and currently serves on its board of directors. In July 2021, Hannah implemented ketogenic therapy and ultimately put her bipolar 1 disorder into complete remission. This experience inspired her to devote her career to disseminating the science of metabolic therapies and working to make them a first-line treatment option. Hannah served as a volunteer with the Brain Energy movement started by Dr. Chris Palmer, but now serves as a volunteer with Metabolic Collective to mobilize grassroots advocates to raise awareness and increase access to metabolic therapies for psychiatric and neurological disorders. Today, she actively implements treatments for neurometabolic dysfunction, including ketogenic therapy, intermittent fasting, exercise, and meditation. Hannah is also working on a book about her experiences titled Radiant Beast, the Mitochondrial Pathway, and I'm very grateful for her to be on with us today. Hannah, I really appreciate you coming on for our listeners. Thank you. How are you?
Thank you so much for having me, Eddie. It's great to be here. I'm a big fan of the work that you're doing to raise awareness, and I'm honored to have a conversation with you today.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, likewise, everything that you all do is much needed out there. So we'll jump right into it. Can you please tell us a little bit about your mental health journey?
Yes, I was reflecting on this recently because I've had an opportunity to share my story a number of times now. After speaking with someone recently and ending that interview, I was thinking over my journey, and there's a specific way that I've come to tell it, just distilling the main points. And mainly, the way I tell it right now is to speak to people who are in a dark place and need that message of hope, and going through that whole journey. I know that people so desperately need to hear that there can be a life beyond that devastating diagnosis and the trials and tribulations that people go through, especially as someone who barely survived my illness. But I also had to ask myself, telling that same story over and over again, which does have an element of trauma, is there a negative impact on me to continue telling that difficult story? What I was thinking about is during my healing journey, the first year kind of doing ketogenic therapy, when my brain was changing so rapidly and I just began to experience life in a whole new way, I bought a book that really also had a big impact on me called Be Your Future Self Now by organizational psychologist Dr. Benjamin Hardy.
Yeah.
And the message was so inspiring to me because he talked about how often we think that we're defined by the past, when really we can be pulled by the magnetism of our ideal future and how important it is to envision the future that you want. And a powerful point he also makes is how our current reality allows us to mold the past and see it from a new perspective.
Yes.
And that our past is not some kind of stagnant thing. It's malleable and we continue to reinterpret the experiences that we've been through.
Yes.
So while I continue to tell my story in a pretty simplified way that I think will resonate with people who may be struggling, there's this whole other journey that I get to connect with people who are in remission, like me, from psychiatric conditions. That's about post-traumatic growth and redefining ourselves
Yes.
um, in the wake of both the trauma, but then the incredible. I can tell you, I'm now 4 years into using metabolic therapies as my sole form of treatment with complete stability, no episodes of hypomania, mania, or depression. And that novelty has not worn off at all. I still find it absolutely incredible
Wow.
that for so many years I struggled and was told there was no alternative to the antipsychotic medications that I took that had devastating side effects for me. I accepted that. It greatly diminished my quality of life. And to realize that I can live really liberated from that. For
Yeah.
each year, I'm pinching myself like, I can't believe I'm still experiencing this incredible quality of life that I will never take for granted.
Yeah.
So I think it's important to start the interview, even though I will talk through the more challenging times with the where I am now, which is a beautiful place. And I'm so grateful to be able to spread that message of hope.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's amazing. That's great. It reminds me of Dr. Wayne Dyer. You change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. So that's powerful. Um, Great. The official diagnosis to confirm was bipolar 1, right?
Yes, bipolar 1 disorder,
Yep.
which some of the listeners may be aware of the differences between bipolar 1 disorder and bipolar 2 disorder. Basically, with bipolar 1 disorder, it goes beyond just having the elevated energy you'd experience in hypomania, where maybe you're not sleeping as much and you're frenetic and you're doing tons of things and impulsive and everything. But bipolar 1 slips over into a full-blown mania,
Yeah.
which typically people describe it as a psychotic episode. I've actually come to want to push back, and even though I often talk about it as a psychotic episode, I really don't like that word because it, for most people, they hear the word psychotic and psychosis and they think of someone who is violent and, and really what I like to call it is an altered state, an
Yeah.
ongoing altered state that I experienced where I became delusional and out of touch with reality. I wasn't violent, I wasn't a threat to anyone. I was just basically, I describe it as falling asleep while you're awake. I was in my own dream world, like almost like putting on a VR headset where I was just in my own little world while walking around awake in reality. And for me, that experience was devastating because it came completely out of nowhere. This was 12 years ago. I was 28 years old at the time, and I thought my future was bright. Things were going really well. I had a full scholarship to get my master's degree in London abroad, and my master's was focused on a nonprofit organization I had started, Jhoole, which you mentioned,
Ah,
that empowers women in India through garment manufacturing. I was really passionate about that work and so grateful to have this opportunity, this full scholarship. Um, and it seemed like my future was bright. I didn't see any indicators that my mental health was off. In retrospect, I see signs of hypomania, but I wasn't educated to understand that. Up to that point, anything that I would now recognize as hypomania, I saw as an asset. I thought I'm a passionate, driven person. I didn't have negative habits at the time. I didn't even really drink, and I was meditating and exercising. Thought I was eating a healthy diet. Which was whole foods, vegan, but higher in carbs, with things like lentils and chickpeas. Anyway, I didn't recognize any signs that something could go totally awry and that I could end up with a psychiatric condition. So when I had my first episode of an altered reality, an altered state, it was like I was working on a paper one night for school. And like I had done so many times as a student for my undergraduate studies, just trying to meet the deadline and staying up all night to work on this paper. And so usually all my ideas would synthesize. I'd come out with a paper that I loved. I'd crash and go to sleep and wake up and submit it, right? But that night I just never crashed. And instead, my thoughts became increasingly chaotic and slowly delusional. And I was up for I don't know how many nights on end. And I began to hallucinate. I saw my clothes moving around by themselves. I saw a giant snake slithering through my apartment. I ended up wandering out onto the streets of London and into a church, and they were teaching English as a second language classes there. And I just started demanding that they please introduce me to God. And instead of introducing me to God, which, I would have loved, instead they called the police who escorted me.
yeah.
Uh, actually had to drag me literally kicking and screaming because as part of the paranoia, I really felt that people were after me and trying to kill me. So this validated all of that. And the police took me to an inpatient psychiatric facility where I was held against my will.
Yeah.
As someone who felt paranoid and that I was being murdered, it was quite scary because they held me down and injected me with an antipsychotic medication. I was there for over a month and a half, and it really wasn't even until I was out of the hospital that the reality started to set in and I came to have the understanding that I was a psychiatric patient. You're in such an altered state that I couldn't grasp the reality of the situation that was happening. And it was only later that I began to process what had happened and try to make sense of it.
Wow. Wow. I mean, yeah, I can only imagine how you felt throughout that whole process. How did you feel when you actually got the diagnosis?
Yeah, so when I started to come back to reality and realize like something very traumatic happened, and at that point, it really felt like my sense of self had been through a blender. I had to question everything I knew about reality. I'm like, how could this happen to me? Like, what went wrong? And having no real answers. I'm like, did I get some toxic mold poisoning? Like, what happened to my brain that seemed to happen out of nowhere? And of course, like with people's psychiatric diagnoses, they can't show you a tangible root cause and say like this is what went wrong. It's kind of this mysterious black box of this diagnosis. And at the time, I hit a major depression as soon as the psychosis lifted. And it felt like as I came back to reality, I was coming back to a life that felt totally foreign to me. As I had mentioned, I'd been someone passionate, energetic. Now I was on these medications, had been through this traumatic event, and I felt like I was grieving the death of myself. Like I'd look at pictures of myself from just months before and feel like she had no idea how lucky she was. I felt like I had brain damage, and I thought that I would never get myself back. I felt so broken and so confused, and I had incessant suicidal ideation. Um, and it was hard for my family and friends to see as well. That shift in me didn't make any sense. I went from someone who was a social entrepreneur, starting a nonprofit organization, getting grants for it, seeing success, getting a scholarship, being a hardworking student, and all of a sudden I can barely brush my teeth, I can barely get dressed.
Yeah.
Um, but getting the diagnosis itself, I will say that after that first episode, I was told by clinicians that there was a chance that it was a fluke and that maybe I didn't actually have bipolar disorder, and there was a small chance that I wouldn't have another episode. So they recommended that I stay on medication. I was put on olanzapine, an antipsychotic,
Yeah.
for at least 6 months, and then I could experiment with going off of it. So that's what I did. Because I had so many terrible effects from the medication, of course, I wanted to go off of them. I
Yeah.
had put on more than 70 pounds in under 6 months that I was on the medication. I experienced constant brain fog, fatigue. I felt cognitive impairment. I had blunted emotions, blunted creativity. I really felt like a shadow of myself. So I did experiment with going off of the medication for 6 months, and I did a lot to try to reclaim my life and my health at that point. I was exercising a lot, eating what I thought was a healthy diet. Um, and I ended up losing the weight. And about 8 months passed, and I started to become slowly hypomanic again. And then within a year, I had my second full-blown episode, which is when I got the really devastating blow. Like, this is a chronic, lifelong condition. And if you want to maintain your mental stability, the only choice you have is to stay on these medications. So basically, I was told it would be a trade-off. My physical health, all those things I had to sacrifice was necessary if I didn't want to end up, in a psych ward out of my mind. I thought it was the only choice that I have. And so, I went back on the medication, and sure enough, after it was so hard to accept because after working so hard to feel physically good again and start to reclaim my sense of self,
Yeah.
the same exact symptoms happened, the deep depression that lasted a year, suicidal depression and all of that. I did eventually get over the suicidal ideation, and I ended up staying stable on medication for about 7 years.
Yeah.
And though I was stable and no longer suicidal, able to work and live independently and all of that, I never got my quality of life back. And I still struggled with the same feelings of just that passion and love for life that I had always known was just gone. I could barely make it through each work day, and I didn't work a job that was challenging for me. I just would go to work, come home, and like basically go to bed. My quality of life was gone.
Yeah. Yeah. It's it's a lot that you went through over a good amount of years, but you persevered and then you came to metabolic therapy. How did you get to metabolic therapy? How did you come across of it?
Yeah, the transition for me was when like end of 2018, beginning of 2019. I started working for a nonprofit called Woman Space that this has nothing to do with ketogenic therapy per se, though there are things that they did that were metabolic therapies in the sense of they taught programming centered on self-actualization, mainly for women, things like meditation, holistic health, different modalities, the creative arts, and just being in that environment started to light a spark in me. And at the same time, I mentioned Benjamin Hardy and the idea of starting to visualize a compelling future to draw you forward. And that's what I started to do. For the first time in years, I started to have hope and I started to try to visualize how my life might improve. And I had no idea how I would get there.
Yeah.
But I stumbled on intermittent and extended fasting. I started doing that. I guess one other important point I should make is that during that 7 years of stability, when I lost my quality of life, I started using negative coping habits a lot. So I was drinking far too much. I started smoking, all of these things I never would have done before, but it was like, well, what's the point? Because I have this mysterious illness, even when I try to live healthy, I can't. So it provided some kind of immediate relief and enjoyment that I turned to a lot. So at that stage, when I started working for Woman's Space, I decided to give up those negative coping habits, which took time, but I did that mainly by focusing on positive ones that would replace them. So I started jogging, which was great for me. I started meditating and then discovering intermittent and extended fasting, which I now know as a metabolic therapy, was totally transformative for me.
Yeah.
Whenever I fasted, I just felt this incredible like clarity and energy and a way that I hadn't felt in years. And now, of course, I understand more about the mechanisms. But at the time, all I knew was it felt amazing. And in fact, I had some friends and family who started to be concerned. They're like, "You're like fasting all the time. Why are you addicted to this?" But I just inherently knew that it was healing. And I did read a bit about autophagy and like cellular repair, but I didn't understand the relationship with mitochondrial health or my specific illness. All that to say, like, I started feeling really good again doing those therapies, and I was still on medication at the time. But, I had this thought, it's been like 7 years, I haven't had an episode. These medications have these negative side effects, but I'm feeling so great. Like, maybe I really just don't have bipolar disorder anymore. Maybe I'm over this. So for the third time, I decided to go off of the medication. And I really like to emphasize this point for everyone who's listening because it is so critical. I wish, like, now there's so many resources available. So I never would have done what I did back then if I had the resources that are available today. It is critical that you work with a clinician and that you educate yourself on safe hyperbolic tapering practices. One of the problems is even a lot of clinicians don't understand how to safely taper someone off of off of psychiatric medications, and they will often do it too quickly, which can cause a number of problems. So if anyone starts ketogenic therapy and feels that they want to or need to start tapering their medication, they need to educate themselves. There's resources online like Inner Compass Initiative, which provides great, educational resources so that people can learn about safe tapering practices. And then they need to work with their prescriber to be tapered at a safe and slow rate. But at the time, I didn't understand any of that. I did just decide to go off the medication. And sure enough, within 8 months, hypomanic, full-blown manic episode within a year.
Yeah.
But I will say something that's very interesting to me is that my third manic episode was actually the least severe of the other two that I had had. That is apparently pretty atypical. Clinicians say usually each consecutive episode gets worse. To
Yes.
me, that's an indicator that I had already done some healing through this fasting and that it was working, not enough to completely keep me stable. I needed ketogenic therapy for that. But it was enough. I think it had made a difference. And coming out of that third hospitalization, again, I was given that same message. You have to stay on your antipsychotic medication. And they wanted me to start taking it again. And I was like, I just can't do this again. I've only started to reclaim my physical health and
Yeah.
to get myself back to feel like I have creativity again and can think clearly. Um, so I just couldn't do it. I know sometimes patients are almost blamed by our culture if they're not willing to adhere to like the standard of care treatments, and there was risk involved, but I just thought I would rather actually have an episodic illness
Mm.
if it allowed me to at least experience some moments of joy. I felt like I was living in this numb limbo state where I was just disconnected from life, and I thought, I'd rather experience an episodic illness and still have those moments of beauty and awe and joy and creativity than to just be stripped of that. I don't even feel human, in this
Yeah.
state. So I decided I'm gonna, but luckily I had another thought, which is maybe there's alternatives out there that I'm just not aware of.
Uh,
Like I should
yeah.
see what's out there. So I started doing research and came across a number of things, some things about supplementation, stuff like that. But when I came upon Dr. Christopher Palmer's website, and this was before Brain Energy was published, before he'd done the podcast rounds, but he
Yeah.
did have a little bit of information on his website about ketogenic therapy. And of course, immediately I'm like, is this the reason I feel so amazing in ketosis? Is this
Yeah.
related?
Yeah.
And so that gave me so much hope. I'm like, okay, there's this mechanism of like, okay, ketones is a different fuel that my brain can use more efficiently. So that might be why I immediately feel better in ketosis. But there's also this idea of ongoing mitochondrial repair, like not just autophagy, but this mitophagy where we're getting rid of damaged mitochondria, mitochondrial biogenesis, where we're creating new healthy mitochondria. And like, could this actually be the key? And I couldn't find success stories. So I was cautiously optimistic. Like, what could this do? I think even when I started, I wasn't totally confident, like, this will keep me out of the hospital. I'll be able to be completely stable. It has wildly exceeded my expectations in terms of, as I told you, 4 years now, total stability.
Yeah.
I feel like I've reclaimed parts of myself I hadn't even realized were missing.
Yeah. Amazing.
And I will say, just people often ask,
Yeah.
having started ketogenic therapy, how long did it take you to benefit and feel the
Yes.
difference?
Yeah.
So when I started, it was freshly out of the hospital. I didn't deal with tapering at that point because I had been put on medication so short term, like just while I was hospitalized, and made that decision that I didn't want to stay on it. So I started, and as I mentioned, like in the past, after my episodes, that deep, debilitating depression would last about a year.
Yeah.
And this time, like the severity of my depression immediately decreased, going from like that suicidal ideation to just like a mild depression. And that mild depression lasted just a couple months and then it lifted entirely. And I haven't looked back since, really. It's just continued to get better and better. And I'm a big believer in the theory that one of the underlying mechanisms is this mitochondrial health factor because I
Yes.
seem to feel better and better. And it especially, I think, was just like exponential growth, change, and everything in that first year of ketogenic therapy.
Yes. Wow. That's powerful. Yeah, it's very, very rare for so many years to have that diagnosis and then for you to then have 4 years of the results that you've had. And it's just a testament to these metabolic therapies. So fasting was big. Um, you know, what as far as metabolic therapies, could you explain to our listeners what other metabolic therapies are included in that suite other than fasting?
Sure. So metabolic therapies, it's such a broad umbrella term that's kind of hard to pin down. I'd really think of it as anything that benefits our mitochondrial health and
Yep.
helps us to better transform and utilize energy
Yes.
efficiently. So it is incredibly broad. Metabolic Mind recently launched the Think Smart Metabolic Framework for Mental Health,
Yep.
which was an attempt to really try to simplify and categorize these metabolic therapies in a way that people could understand. Because in my role, um, as advocacy and communications manager, I get to connect with so many other people whose experiences have mirrored my own. And for, I would say, the majority of people who maintain this quality of life long term and are able to keep their symptoms in remission with metabolic therapies, they have so many complementary therapies in addition to ketogenic therapy, which we think is for many is like a cornerstone
Yeah.
that, helps with that energy dysregulation, helps stabilize their energy and get them healthy again. But then to continue to adhere, there's so many other things that you have to do. So we look at it as, think, which is therapeutic integration of nutritional ketosis, the
Yep.
ketogenic aspect. And then we go into sleep,
Yep.
movement, avoid, rebuild, and track. I think we all can, it's pretty easy to agree how critical sleep is and getting good quality sleep, right? So in the Think Smart framework, we try to harness the wisdom of all of these what we call experts by experience, people like me who have done this firsthand, and they share the variety of different approaches that they use to optimize their sleep quality. Things like just having a consistent sleep and wake time, things like wearing blue light blockers. But what we try to emphasize in this model is that it's very customizable and different things can work for different people. So there's no one right way, but managing sleep,
Yeah.
movement, moving your body. And again, this varies so much from individual to individual. Maybe some people just like walking, while others prefer intense straight strength training and weightlifting. And for me, running is key. I love it for stress management.
Yeah.
Um, Avoid, again, very important. And
Yeah.
while this seems like common sense, it actually can happen quite often that people are like, why isn't ketogenic therapy working for me? And you find out they're doing drugs or drinking, and all of those things are going to impact your metabolic health.
Yeah.
So that's really a key of like limiting or entirely eliminating, as I have done and many others have done, alcohol and, staying away from smoking and even things like emotional triggers or, toxic relationships. All of that would fall into the avoid category.
Yeah.
Rebuild is a category that I love because this can touch on something that I mentioned before, the post-traumatic growth element. With Think
Yes.
Smart, our real goal is to reach people where they are in this journey. So whether that's the heavy lift of the initial behavior change needed to start implementing metabolic therapies, to maintenance, all the way through that post-traumatic growth. Because I speak to so many people, they go through a process of grieving as they realize that they lost sometimes decades of their lives. I lost about a decade. Sometimes people have lost multiple decades of their lives.
Yeah.
And now they feel like this solution was here all along. And I just was not told it was an option.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of pain that can go into getting your life back. But then also realizing, both the pain and the opportunity. Like now I'm going to make the most of the years I have left. And how do you rebuild your life? And that can be all about finding meaning and purpose and connection and, working towards like becoming being pulled by that compelling future, visualizing where you want to go now that your symptoms are in remission and you're liberated from that.
Yeah.
And then tracking is just any process that people would use to track their different metabolic therapies and so that they can troubleshoot if there's challenges or see things that are particularly beneficial. And again, people have totally different apps that they use and different ways that they relate to tracking. So,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, no, the Think Smart framework, what you guys have put together is an amazing resource from what I've researched. I mean, it's the best resource out there, I think, that anybody could access on mental health. Because it's so powerful to read about. It's great when you can get on PubMed and you can read about studies and see great results, but it is so much more powerful when you can get on Think Smart and you can see this is what Hannah did, or this is what Mia did, or this is what for different diagnoses. And yeah, it seems to be it's a little bit different for everyone, but everyone kind of follows that same framework. Um, and exercise is big, everything you just talked about, but like you're saying, that cornerstone is uh, switching over that brain energy with some sort of ketogenic therapy, whether you get into it through fasting or a ketogenic diet. And we'll come back to Think Smart, but could you talk a little bit about what the brain energy theory really is? What is
mhm.
that?
Yes, and I will absolutely talk about that with the caveat that, I am not Dr. Christopher Palmer. And if somebody wants to understand the brain energy theory, which is very complex and nuanced, they have to read his book. It is not something you can succinctly summarize in a few minutes, but I'll give you my perspective as a layperson with lived experience, how I interpret the brain energy theory, which for me, it boils down to seeing psychiatric conditions as clusters of symptoms related to metabolic dysfunction that impairs the brain. So, really seeing psychiatric conditions as some form of energy dysregulation, whether that's like a downregulation like you see in depression or upregulation like you see in mania, that somehow our energy systems are impaired and it can result in a variety of symptoms. And really, what I like about Dr. Palmer's framing and his brain energy theory is seeing it as boiling down to mitochondrial health and how that influences energy regulation in the body and can create symptoms, as we know, both like physical illnesses, but of course also psychiatric conditions. And
Yeah.
another researcher related worth mentioning who I greatly admire is Dr. Martin Picard, and he's
Yes.
pioneering a new field called mitochondrial psychobiology, which is really getting straight at that point, how are mitochondria influencing energy in the body? And he describes the brain or consciousness itself really as an energy pattern, which I think is a very interesting way of looking at
Yeah.
our perception of the world. Mhm.
Yeah. 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 Dr. Martin Picard he's got some great work as well. Yeah, this whole brain energy theory is so powerful because I'm happy that mitochondria are more and more in focus. We've always heard about them, but it really seems like they're becoming more central to the conversation. And boy, I mean, all these chronic diseases that have skyrocketed over especially the last 2 decades, um, metabolic dysfunction seems to underlie every single one of them, and dysfunction in the energy producing mitochondria is central to that. We got type 2 diabetes that's skyrocketed, heart disease, neurodegenerative cancer, and it all kind of comes down to very high carbohydrate loads, high carb burning, inflexibility metabolically. So, what I'm hearing you say is mental illness diagnoses could be also correlated to the higher numbers of chronic diseases. Coming back to this metabolic dysfunction, is that what I'm hearing?
Absolutely. And in a way, it was liberating for me to come to realize that because for a long time, like so many patients with a psychiatric condition, I felt inherently flawed, like something was wrong with me. And I know that's a common way that people feel because it is still stigmatized to a certain extent. But later I came to realize, this is just the way that metabolic dysfunction is manifesting for me, and for others, it's cancer or diabetes. And there is no shame in the psychiatric symptoms that I experience due to what I would call neurometabolic dysfunction any more than any other illness. And to your point, I think our food is playing a huge role in that crisis and both of mental and physical health. And then there are a lot of things about our modern culture and environments that also exacerbate these issues. The constant artificial light, the stress that people experience, pollution. There are just so many different things that we're up against. But something like ketogenic therapy can be so restorative. So, whatever causes the metabolic dysfunction, it might not just be food alone.
Yeah.
Ketogenic therapy can still be a very powerful repair tool because our cells are just facing unprecedented challenges, compared to the rest of human history with the environments we're in today.
Yeah. 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 No, you're 100% right. Our environment has definitely changed a whole lot in a very short period of time. And yeah, when I think of ketogenic therapy, I think of the ketogenic diet or fasting. We had Dr. Matthew Phillips on, and he talked about the power of fasting and the power of ketosis really being much more in line with our ancestral history because it's just recently that we've been able to now just graze on processed carbs all day and overload our brains and overload our bodies with so much sugar. Um, it's the ketogenic diet is in all these metabolic therapies is like a reset for us, and you're living proof of that. What's amazing is you're practicing a vegetarian ketogenic diet. Is that right?
Yes.
How do you do that?
Yeah, well, so I've been a vegetarian since I was a child, like since I was old enough to realize meat was an animal, and it wasn't a judgment on anyone else. It just grossed me out. I'm like, I just can't do it. And my parents thought it was a phase, and I never grew out of it. So I just wanted that was something I see as kind of non-negotiable for my approach to eating. Um, so it hasn't been hard. Well, I mean, I shouldn't say it that way because I also realize people have different challenges when they switch to a ketogenic diet.
Right.
But for me, I find this diet like so satiating and delicious, and I've had no trouble maintaining ketosis even while eating vegetarian keto. I think part of the key for me with that. And another thing about Think Smart is really focusing on customization. So everybody's metabolism is a little bit different, which is why we recommend getting a keto mojo meter, like looking at your actual ketone levels in terms of the food you eat. So
Yeah.
I realized pretty early on that counting carbs wasn't great for me. Like when I would count carbs, it would feel like I could barely eat any vegetables.
Yeah.
But when I switched to just looking at my own individual metabolism and getting into ketosis with the foods that I ate, I could eat a lot more vegetables than I would have thought I could and remain in ketosis. So I think it's really important for people to really look at how their own body responds. And I would especially emphasize that for vegetarians because, of course, like vegetables have a lot of fiber and that you can just sometimes react differently to them.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah,
Mhm.
it's amazing. And you can definitely read about your protocol. Everybody who's interested on the Think Smart framework, which we're going to be linking, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. Um, Before that, you are the advocacy and communications manager for the Baszucki group and Metabolic Mind. Could you just talk a little bit about Metabolic Mind's mission and then how that relates to the Baszucki group?
So, Bazooki Group and Metabolic Mind is really funding the science and research behind ketogenic therapies. So, the pilot trials have come out from Stanford University and from University of Edinburgh that show how promising this intervention is.
Yeah.
There are also ongoing trials, including some randomized controlled trials, which are considered the gold standard, kind of that a lot of clinicians are going to say that they want to see before they will consider this a valid form of treatment. And it's really important to build that evidence base. At the same time, we have metabolic mind, which from a lived experience perspective for people like me and the countless others sharing their stories and Think Smart, we did not want to wait years of our lives for the science to validate this.
Yes.
We wanted to experience this change now. I mean, I've talked to fathers with infants, who want, ketogenic therapy has allowed them to have quality time with their loved one that they'd never get back.
Yes.
So we don't think it's necessary to make patients wait for this with the amount of promising research already out there and the countless, thousands of testimonials that are coming forward from people saying this is working for them. Because at the end of the day, from, over 100 years of evidence in epilepsy, we know that ketogenic therapy is a safe intervention. And with the current case studies and testimonials, there's enough to say that there is a potential incredible upside for people and very low risk. So there's no reason not to encourage people to try this if, they're experiencing negative side effects from their medication or are looking for an alternative.
Yes. Yes.
So, Metabolic Mind creates the public facing
Yeah.
work now that can help patients and families who want to implement this and also clinicians who are on the cutting edge who see the mechanistic evidence, who see all of these testimonials and say, I see that in a lot of patients, our standard of care treatments produce poor outcomes. And a lot of clinicians are willing to say, like, patients deserve other better opportunities. And there's enough here to give people that chance.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's amazing. It's an amazing resource for education and informing people. Dr. Brett Shearer does such a great job, and you're on there now, doing all your Think Smart interviews, which are amazing. Again, this is in many cases it's life-saving information. So it's an amazing resource, and we'll get that linked on there as well. And the studies, this is exactly what's needed, because you're right. A lot of clinicians. Um, will be limited without those randomized control trials. But the more those get established, I think the more clinicians will be open, and I think very shortly we'll start seeing these ketogenic therapies as first line treatments. So now metabolic collect,
Sorry, I wanted to throw in one more thing
yeah,
since that we do that I think is really important. We help to get some continued medical education courses
ah,
available for free on my CME. So there's a page on metabolicmind.org that links to all of those. And that's incredible for me because clinicians now who are interested and want to provide this to their patients, they have to do that to keep their licensure up to date anyway. And this can provide them with the resources they need to really help patients with metabolic therapies today.
yeah, yeah. What a great bridge. Yeah, that's excellent. And now, as an extension of that, Metabolic Collective, which you're doing a lot of work with right now, can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so the people often ask me how I first got involved with this movement and how I ended up at Metabolic Mind. So my first step into this movement was as a volunteer for Dr. Christopher Palmer, helping him to raise awareness of the brain energy theory. And I got connected to that small group working with Dr. Christopher Palmer in 2022, like right before Brain Energy was published. And I was just about a year into my own journey. And being able to connect with him and the other volunteers, many of whom also had lived experience, was so powerful for me. And I feel like it played a profound role in my healing to connect with them and to see what was possible for my own life and just to have that mission and purpose. And I got so excited to volunteer. It's like outside of my working hours, it was like I was constantly wanting to work on something for brain energy, evenings and weekends. And Dr. Palmer, once the book was published, he had countless people reaching out wanting to volunteer, but there wasn't really a way to engage that many people. And then when I did get connected through Dr. Palmer with Baszucki Group and Metabolic Mind and got to make my passion my profession, which has been incredible, we also at Metabolic Mind got a lot of emails from people saying this changed my life or this changed my loved one's life. I really want to be involved. What can I do locally? And I was excited, but it was also hard because there's no infrastructure to figure out how to mobilize that many people. But it's also a missed opportunity because we just have people with incredible skills who want to give back. And we just thought, with a little bit of organization and to systematize this, we can help mobilize these people and give them something to do. And not only would that be powerful for the movement, but like I experienced, this could be profound for the people in as part of their journey, both in kind of that rebuild aspect, as well as even engaging people who are currently kind of healing so that they can connect with others and see where people have come. And it gives them a mission beyond themselves to think about and work towards. So we got a small group together with a lot of the volunteers who'd actually been involved with Dr. Palmer, because he at the time had been thinking about starting a nonprofit foundation, but he's actually instead starting a clinic, so he didn't really have time to continue those efforts. So some of the volunteers who'd been involved with him pivoted to like working together on establishing Metabolic Collective, and we just got last year our 501(c)(3) status as a registered nonprofit organization. And what we were doing is initially kind of really thinking about there's so many opportunities in this field, right? So we're thinking, what can we do that's most impactful and how are we going to do that? So we did things like focus groups, including some of the pioneers and leaders in this field, as well as people with patients and families, kind of looking at what do people see as the greatest needs and how can we really distill it down to like what could be our most impactful model and way that we can leverage these wonderful people who want to create momentum and help others. So we're finally getting to that place, and very soon we'll be doing more of a public-facing launch to mobilize more people. But we really came down on, kind of three main things that will allow us, I believe, to have a major impact as an organization. And right now, it's just entirely volunteer led. So the first one will be providing education for potential advocates. And that would be things like, we had people reach out who actually, as early adopters, I find a lot of patients are incredibly knowledgeable about the science behind these interventions, but some of them, because they're not scientists, they don't have that background, they can lack the confidence to get out there and speak. So we had some people reach out saying, I would love to give a talk at my local library, but I'm nervous. And, so we saw a need, like we could provide resources to help people who want to give presentations. So a psychiatric nurse named Natasha Smichaels is leading a project that we're working on now that will provide people with PowerPoint presentation that they can use and also have some live webinars to talk people through any kind of questions they have about what it's like to do public speaking and that kind of thing. But really the sky's the limit with this bucket, which is self-paced education for potential advocates. So for example, we would really love to have people drop off information at local psychiatry clinics and places like that about metabolic therapies and give little elevator pitches just to make clinicians aware that this is a treatment option that they could pursue. Like I said, having the continued medical education available, like clinicians could do this today.
Yeah.
And we look at big pharma, and they're able to pay reps tons of money to go out there and promote drugs. And obviously, we don't have that advantage in ketogenic therapy. It's really going to have to be a patient and family-led movement. But people are so passionate about this. There's no reason they couldn't do that same thing and go and drop off information at clinics.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's powerful. Yeah, it's powerful. It reminds me of what we talked a little bit offline on, and yeah, when you say it that way and you contrast it versus the pharmaceutical reps, and look, hey, nothing against the pharmaceutical reps; they're doing their job, but here we have an example. I don't know anybody else personally who's ever reversed or who's put their bipolar one in remission. I know you, and you're such a great example. But then Think Smart framework, anybody can get on there. You can see all of these people who have been helped by this therapy. You'd think it'd be front page news. You'd think with all the pain and suffering with these diagnoses, this would be something that would be very quickly disseminated through the medical establishment. But no, it hasn't been. And these great doctors on the ground, like Dr. Chris Palmer, who are doing great work and helping people, and others as well, they need our help. And we do need to spread the word. And what you guys are doing with Metabolic Collective is so integral because um, we might be just a ragtag bunch compared to the professional pharmaceutical reps, but if my memory serves me correctly, I think it was a ragtag bunch of committed amateurs who won this country versus the most excellent professional army in the world at its time. So I think it's that commitment, that the unity of people in a shared struggle, like all of us, who are getting pulled to that compelling future, like you talked about before, um, that I think it's gonna create a lot of positive movement. So I'm really grateful for everything you guys are doing. Um, so uh, one of the last questions here, if you could have no limitations, right? What would you, Hannah, like to see? Uh, what would you like to see change most in standard of care for psychiatry and neurology?
Without a doubt, I would like ketogenic and metabolic therapies to be presented as a first line treatment. And when someone has their first episode, I would like them to be told that they're going to face some challenges, but remission is possible. Overcoming this is possible. No one should be told that they have a lifelong chronic illness. I think back to my first episode, and if I had been presented with ketogenic therapy as an option, I absolutely would have started it right then and there. That would have been the route I had chosen to take. Everybody deserves to see this root cause healing treatment as an option. And as a patient advocate, I'm all for choice. And if people want to take medications and they feel that that is beneficial for them and is serving them, I would never object to that. But what I want to do is raise an awareness for those people like myself and others who are desperate for a better solution that leads to real healing and long-term recovery.
Yeah, beautiful, beautiful. Yeah, I'm right with you. Um, if someone would like to volunteer, how do they get started?
Yeah, so they can go to our website, metaboliccollective.org, and there is a form there that they can fill out, and we're able to save all of their information. And we have some volunteer coordinators who reach out to people and do have meetings. And soon we'll be having our first kind of at the end of July webinar where we'll be talking through all the different projects we're working on. So
Nice.
yeah,
Great, great.
let
Uh,
more people get involved.
yeah,
Mhm.
beautiful. Um, if for anybody who's listening who might be a little bit skeptical or hesitant to starting like a lifestyle treatment like this, a metabolic therapy, ketogenic therapy to improve their mental and cognitive health, what would you say to them?
I think I would say, of course, the science is ongoing. We're trying to better understand mechanisms and what percentage of patients are likely to benefit. We cannot say, without a doubt that this will work for everyone. But what we do see is for the people it works for, it can be absolutely transformative. And to me, reducing carbohydrates to get into ketosis is a relatively small price to pay, a small sacrifice compared to the potential upside.
Yeah.
So I would say if you're willing to dedicate yourself, ideally I mean, honestly, in my mind, ideally for even at least a year-long commitment, because some of the people I talked to, it did take that long, but then they saw incredible benefits. But even if you just give it a try for 3 months or 6 months or whatever commitment you're willing to make that's empowering for you,
Yeah.
it's a small price to pay for the benefits that you could see. So if your current treatments are insufficient, you feel like your quality of life could be better, you want to try to improve your physical and mental health,
Yeah.
why not give it a try?
Yeah. Why not? That's right. What's the next step, or what's one step every listener could take to improve their mental and cognitive health after finishing this interview?
I think I would say that, ketogenic therapy as this cornerstone treatment can transform your life, and I think everybody should be giving it a try and taking those steps to educate themselves. But I really believe the most critical first step is to just have hope and start visualizing
Yes.
beautiful future that you can have that is possible for you. And, for me, just sitting down and doing a little visualization meditation, shut your eyes for 5 minutes or 10 minutes and try to imagine in detail the life that you would love to live and know that it is possible.
Yeah.
Start to have hope and start to imagine, the way that you could transform your life. That would be my first
Yeah.
advice.
Powerful, powerful, and it's more accessible than it ever has been because Metabolic Mind, Metabolic Collective, everybody who's working on this is creating more and more accessibility to tools to bridge the gap between where we are and that vision. But you're right, we've got to visualize where we want to be. And last piece here, this book you're working on, tell us a little bit about Radiant Beast.
Oh, yeah. Thank you for asking about it because actually, something exciting I haven't announced yet, and the first article has not come out, but I'm going to start writing kind of sections that are related to Radiant Beast on the Metabolic Mind blog. So I've done a lot of writing for Metabolic Mind in my past year and a half with the organization that's been about a wide variety of things related to metabolic therapies. But I'm actually going to start I'm calling it an open workbook, Radiant Beast, an open workbook, but I really want to start conversations related to the content of that book right now.
Yeah,
And as I hinted at in the beginning of this interview, for me, I'm continuing to see my experiences in a new light. Even the past experiences of an altered state, I
yeah,
can find these kind of silver linings that I never saw before.
yeah,
And the writing I'm going to do now is going to be more about that post-traumatic growth process, kind of a discovery process for myself, but hoping to learn a lot that will benefit others in the meantime and focusing on things like ancient practices and how that can tie into healing in our modern age.
yeah.
So, brief
Awesome.
overview. Yeah.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, that's going to be powerful. That's going to be a first in class resource book for everyone because anyone who's had any pain and suffering around that diagnosis or any mental illness, you are a bright beacon of what can be done with a set of tools that really has low risk and high reward. So that's looking forward to that book. Where can people find you and your resources now?
I think the best place to go is metabolicmind.org. As I said, the Radiant Beast writing I'm going to be doing will be live on the blog there, and we have so many other tools. And I definitely recommend everybody take a look at those inspiring stories as part of Think Smart. So,
Perfect.
yeah.
Perfect. Well, great. Look, Hannah, thanks so much for making time for us. It's been really helpful and a lot of valuable information that I know a lot of people are going to take with them and apply and make great things happen with. And you're very busy. You guys are doing great work. So thanks again and looking forward to connecting down the road. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me, Eddie. It was a pleasure to talk with you.